And no, that is not a picture of me at the office. Good morning. It's great to see everybody here this morning. If you're visiting with us today, we're so pleased that you have chosen to be with us this morning, and we hope that you stick around and allow us to get to know you better before you leave. One last word from the older, balding, overweight guy lobby. When Sharon and I and the family were in Oklahoma, one of our responsibilities was to teach the kids on Wednesday night. All the kids from 6th grade down on Wednesday evenings at the Antlers Church of Christ. And it was sometimes difficult, but more than that, it was a joy. It really was, because the way that church family was set up, it was difficult to get to know some of the families. It was a lot easier to get to know the kids. And during that time, the brief time that we were able to be there, we got to form some good relationships with some of the kids that we were able to spend some time with. And this is important. Do we want followers of God in the future? That's a simple yes or no. Yeah? All right? We need to adopt our kids now. Don't put it at the feet of the people teaching classes or at the minister or the youth minister or anything like that. We adopt each other's kids. Spend some time with our children, all the way up to the time where our kids don't like being called kids anymore. Even up to your high school and college age. Kids. You're still kids. Get to know them. Get involved in their lives. Seek to build those bridges. Because these memories that they're making now will help them in the future. So I hope that you sign the list. I hope that we find other ways to get involved in our kids' futures, because that's our future. We want to take the message to people who don't know God, absolutely. But there also needs to be a base of those who are raised knowing God. So I hope that you're able to get involved. This morning, I invite you to flip over to Mark chapter 2. And I was reading a book once. I was going to cite the book, but I couldn't find the book this week, unfortunately. So I want you to know that I didn't come up with this, but I can't tell you who did. But there was a case study in the book about a guy who was an executive at a business. And after he went about 5 years without going on any sort of vacation. He took no personal days off. But finally, his doctor and his psychologist, because he needed one after not taking a break in 5 years, told him, you need time off. You need to take a break. And so finally he scheduled it, got it all worked out, so he decided, okay, this week we're going on a family vacation. So he decided to pack his bag. So he grabs his suitcase and he puts his suitcase on his bag. He unzips it, he opens it, and he says, okay, what do I need? Okay. He puts in his laptop and he throws in his cell phone and he gets his files that he needs to, because he has a big meeting when he comes back to town. He made sure to talk to his secretary and gave her the list of apartments and hotels that they're going to be staying at. He already talked to his other staff that kept them informed of what they need to do while he was out of town, and told them, call me in case you have a hookup and breakdown. And so he put all this stuff in his bag, and then he packed his clothes. He goes on vacation, in which he gets to his hotel room. First thing he does is plug up his cell phone and he plugs up his laptop. Every morning he checks email. Every morning he checks the stocks. Every morning he looks at the list of things that his secretary sent him that he needed to peruse before, just during the day, just to keep him in the loop. And he did this for another 7 days. Come home and he felt just as miserable as he did when he left. And then he said he goes to his doctor and he says, well, I did the trip, I did the vacation, but it doesn't seem to have helped. Are we surprised? When Sherry and I moved to New Mexico, again, it was, as I've told you before, it was a cross-cultural thing. You leave behind everything you know and you relocate totally to this new place. But there was times we were able to go on vacation, so we went back. We've been gone for a year. So guess what? We had a whole lot of friends and family who wanted to see us. And so those first couple of years that we lived outside of the Dallas-Glen-Rose area, we would go back and we would have a social calendar of everybody who wanted to see us. And we tried those first couple of years to see everybody on that list. And to just grab time with every family member and every old friend and we got back home feeling worse than we did when we left. There was one special time. Sherry and I both went to SFA and while living in New Mexico. Now it's 750 miles from Dimmy, New Mexico to Dallas. Now Nacogdoches was another, depending on how fast you're driving, it was another 2.5 and 3 hours east. So, you throw in another couple hundred, maybe 300 miles, and, that's that. And so we decided, hey, we haven't been to the SFA homecoming in several years. And so, Ethan was 2-ish, I think. And so we decided to go to the SFA homecoming by driving. And so we took a couple of days to drive to Nacogdoches, and we had homecoming. And so we decided to drive back. And one day, after staying up late, seeing old college friends, looking around at everything, that again, that was the place where I proposed to Sherry, and that was the place where we really got to know each other, and we had tons of friends who were there. So just late nights, hanging out, and all that jazz. And we decided to drive back to New Mexico in a day. We made it to Fort Worth. We made it to Fort Worth, and then we hit a wall, at which our body said, no, you're done. And so, and we felt it too. We hit that wall at the same time because we got to Fort Worth and we said, goodness sakes, we still got 12 hours to go. We called Sherry's parents, we spent the night, and then we drove back the next day, which we felt a lot better. It was the smart thing to do. When we lived in New Mexico, our kids were kindergarten and first grade. A lot of other parents that we knew, they were asking, your kids don't do Little League. How come your kids aren't doing Little League? Well, it says because the way you do Little League is nuts. They're crazy about Little League. Because what they would do is they would have practice 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday, every day. They would have Little League practice for an hour and a half. In kindergarten and first grade. And then you would have games all day on Saturday. We didn't want to do that. They said, why not? I said, because we appreciate this little thing called family time. And so we didn't do it. We are exhausted. People are exhausted. And the sad thing is that we bring it upon ourselves. When I was doing this, I came across an article that was written back in 2012. So it's a little bit dated, but look at what this says. Now, if you were, employed in 2012, maybe you remember when this came out, but this was called 14 Signs That Americans Are Ridiculously Overworked. It's by Juliet Score. It said 39% of people work more than a typical work week of 40 hours. The average American gets 90 minutes less sleep than they should, and the number of sleep disorders has skyrocketed in recent years. Americans are literally working themselves to death as job stress contributes to heart disease, hypertension, gastric problems, depression, exhaustion, and a variety of other ailments. If current trends continue, Americans will be spending as much time at their jobs in 2100 as they did back in 1920 when regulations were put into place to protect workers. 69% of employees report that work is a significant source of stress, and 41% say they typically feel tense or stressed out during the workday. I love this one. 39% of employees feel rage at their co-workers, and 34% resent their co-workers for working less than they do. I love you, Rebecca. Where's Ricardo? Ricardo's outside. I love you, Ricardo. 52% of workers say they have changed jobs in hopes of finding a less stressful one. 83% of employees admit going to work sick in fear of being punished for missing work. 36% of Americans don't plan to use all their vacation days. The U.S. is one of the few countries that doesn't legally require workers to take time off. By contrast, countries like France and England require workers to take 30 days of vacation. Half of employees are less productive at work as a result of stress, meaning that they crash and lose work hours and have difficulty concentrating. 44% of workers have gained weight from their jobs. Quit looking at me. Since the recession, 86% of executives say their company now expects more of their employees, and 59% of employees feel more pressure. 24% of employees work 6 or more extra hours per week without pay. That figure doubles for management. We are working ourselves to death, but the sad thing is that it's not just about the workplace. It is not just about the workplace, because in recent years it's become more and more about the hobby and the causes. You know, the social causes that we might be involved in, or the hobbies that we might wish to explore. And so we're staying up later and later and later and later and later, but also getting up earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. We are not resting. We do not stop and smell the roses. You ever been around a cranky individual? Something I've learned, and Ethan had his birthday Friday. Sherry and I have been parents for 12 years now. I know, I haven't lost one yet, you know. Yes. I mean, not that one of them passed away, but just that I haven't lost one, like at the store or something. That's what I'm talking about. But but something I've learned is that when my kids get really cranky, even though they're not babies anymore, more times than not, it's because they're thirsty, they're hungry, they need to take a nap. And sometimes when I'm around an adult and they're really cranky, sometimes I want to ask, do you need to go lay down? Because we're not resting. And if we're not resting, that does affect how we act. It does affect how we speak. It affects how we conduct ourselves in public. Which brings us to the next commandment on our list. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now, again, there are people out there that have a problem with the idea that God gives us commandments. And they say, look at how vicious God is. You know, there was a guy who violated the Sabbath. They put him to death. And which I kind of look at things from a different angle. I think to myself, do we sit back and realize that God actually had to give a law to the people to tell them, by law, take a day off? God actually had to waste time on a tablet to tell His people to take a day off. Again, you look at trends and how some people don't like taking time off. This is a commandment that's still needed today. Because we are working ourselves to death. Not in a healthy way either. You know, there's been preachers who have been quoted as saying, I shall work daily and then I'll rest when I get to heaven. And that's the attitude they have. But the sad thing is that we don't get to dictate when we go to heaven or not. You say, why is that sad? You say, because a few years ago, there was a preacher in Gallup, New Mexico, extreme west, close to the Arizona-New Mexico border, in the north part, kind of even with Albuquerque. Dropped dead of a heart attack at 39. Left behind a wife and 2 daughters. You hear about this stuff. How we can be so busy in the world pursuing our careers and pursuing our hobbies, pursuing our likes, and being so active that we forget to take care of our physical bodies. God had to tell His people, take a day off. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Because we, for some reason, have it in our minds that we can just keep going and keep going and keep going without any ill effect. The body just doesn't work like that. We need rest. And God gave this command not as a burden, but as a blessing. Rest. Recharge. Relax. Get back to it tomorrow. To illustrate this point, there was a time in Jesus' life in Mark. And, it says in Mark chapter 2 and verse 23, it says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going throughout the grain fields, and his disciples walked along. They began to pick some heads off grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." See, we got to remember this. This commandment came from God, but God did not want this commandment to become a burden. Again, when we look at the commandments, we look at the Ten Commandments, you look at the law of Moses, and you look at the teachings of the New Testament, don't forget the role of relationship. God is not a bully in which He says, "I want you to do this, but I don't want you to do this because I told you so." God is looking after us like a good parent. And He wants that relationship with us. And in order to have a relationship with God, we must do what He tells us to do. But we also must remember, God has our best interests at heart. And that includes when He told us, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. But it became a burden. And it became a burden because of the Pharisees and the leaders of the Jewish people who just didn't like the fact that it just said, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy and give all your servants and all your animals a day off. They felt like they had to come back and say, this is what this actually means. And so they made a list of some 39 broad activities in which you're not able to do on the Sabbath day. And this includes plowing, reaping, gathering, threshing or extraction, winnowing, sorting, purification, grinding, sifting, kneading, cooking or baking, scouring, laundering, carding, combing wood, dyeing, spinning, warping, making two loops, threading needles, weaving, separating two threads, tying, untying, sewing, tearing, slaughtering, flying, skinning, curing, preserving, smoothing, scoring, measured cutting. Randy, you out of luck. Erasing, building, demolition, extinguishing a fire, igniting a fire. All right, if you ignite that fire and you don't extinguish, you're in a different part of trouble. Applying the finishing touch or transferring between domains. You're not allowed to do these activities. We say, goodness sakes, what are you allowed to do? Well, you can take a few steps and you sit. All right, that's basically what you're supposed to do. But you are able to save a life. They did make an allowance for that. If somebody is in trouble, you are able to save them without anything bad happening to you. But you see what they were doing. They turned it into a burden. Now, even on a day off, we got to eat. That means making something. They took it to a far extreme, and where it became a burden. And you see what these guys were actually doing. They got to the point where they were just following Jesus, waiting for Him to do something in the breaking of the Sabbath, just so they can call Him on the carpet. That's not relaxation. To have somebody watching every move that you're making just to see if you will mess up. Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? They plucked the kernel, rubbed it between their hands, blew it away, and ate the nut. Ooh, it's so bad. Jesus had to remind them. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. God made it for us. And He illustrated it to the people. He made the world in 6 days. The seventh day, God rested. God didn't need a nap. I remember you sometimes see it in kids' rooms and in the buildings. And where they have the illustrations of the 7 days of creation. Day 7 is sometimes illustrated as a cloud with the Z's coming out of it, like God is sleeping. God didn't need a nap. It's God stopped. God stopped creating on day 7. Earlier in the book of Exodus, when God provides His people with manna, He tells them, there will be manna for you 6 days of the week. On the 6th day, be sure to get a double portion, because the next day is going to be the Sabbath. And you're not going to be able to go out and gather food. So make sure you get double on the 6th day so that you can take a break, so that you can rest on the Sabbath day. Lo and behold, the 7th day comes, and guess what the people are doing? Some people will dash out in order to get more manna, totally disregarding what God wanted them to do. It was like God being a stickler. No, He wanted them to rest. Brothers and sisters, there comes a time where we need to physically shut down. Someone might be tempted to say, you're preaching laziness. No. There's a difference. Because the Bible also talks about the not just the necessity, but the blessings that can come from good work. Good, honest work is spoke about highly in the Bible. We're not talking about laziness. We're talking about working 6 days a week. And then taking a day. Taking a day. Taking a day of rest. I mean, you look at how he says it in Exodus 20. In Exodus 20, in verse 8, where it says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is Sabbath to the Lord, your God. Now, look at the restrictions He gives. On it you shall not do any work. Neither you, nor your son, or your daughter, nor your manservant, or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but He rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Stop it! Not just you, your children. Not just you, your servants. Not just you, your animals. Shut it down. Rest. Reflect. Recharge. Get your strength back, so that the next day, for the next 6, you can tackle it and keep going until the next 7th day. God wanted to bless us. When I was in college, I spent a summer being a tire guy, changing, rotating, selling tires at Sam's Club in Garland, Texas. Which, weather-wise in the summer is very similar to down here, where I learned to really hate the word heat index. It's 99 today with a heat index of 100 and holy moly. You know, if it's 110, why don't you just say it's 110? Be done with it. You know, I spent the summer doing that, and when it came to the 4th of July weekend, it was one of those things that really worked in your favor, but then it kicks you in the teeth. You know, somehow in the rotation, the guy who did the schedule, I got 4 days off for 4th of July weekend. That was really cool. Because Sherry was still living in Nacogdoches, so we weren't married yet. So guess what? I got to take 4 days and go see my girlfriend. I had to come home, though, and work the next 10 days. Because, that was my 2 days off for the last week, and the next 2 days were the 2 days off for the coming week. And so my next rotation for a couple of days off didn't come to the end of the following week. And so I had to work 10 days in a row in order to get to my next day off. And by the time I was done, it was towards the middle of July, the dog days of summer, with 100% humidity, working in a garage, and the sweat and the grime and the exhaustion was flying. I was dragging that 10th day. I was absolutely dragging myself to work. But when that time came off, where it says, "Okay, Jeff, you can go home," smile lit my face. I about floated to my truck, because then I was able to have a couple of days off. Brothers and sisters, God wants us to work, and He wants us to do good work, and He wants us to do honest work. And followers of God need to be known for our good, honest work. Yes. But God never expected us to work ourselves to death. And even when it comes to, we might say ministers, Christians, we still need to be known for good, and we need to be diligent. What we do need to take advantage of the situations in which God gives us. Yes, but there comes times in which we have to shut it down. We have to take a day. If you're overworked, remember that God has wanted us to have rest. That's what Hebrews 4 was about. It's not about, we're not just looking for a day off in our work week. We're looking forward to a full rest that comes when we're able to be with God for eternity. Hebrews 4 talks about entering the rest of God. That's something we all need to be looking forward to. The Sabbath was a precursor. It was a preview of the rest that God is offering. Because there will come a time in which all of our labors on earth will come to an end. There will come a time when we won't have to worry about the things that are happening on earth anymore, because we have passed on and entered the land of rest. This is what the people of God have to look forward to. Rest. What is the rest of the story? The rest of the story is that God knows us and He loves us so much that He sought to look after us and to tell us it is okay to take a break and to shut it down and just reflect. Just rest. Because one day, when we have lived our lives of service, and we have sought to be the servant of God all of our lives, there will come a day in which we will come to God face to face. And He will say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into my rest," which will last for eternity. This morning we'd like to offer the invitation to those of you who might be hurting, who might be suffering, who might feel overworked, who might feel burdened by life. This is a problem we have today. We're overworked and we're underpaid. A lot of us feel unappreciated. We're overworked and just dragging, and we feel like that we're just caught in this trap of just exhaustion. We would love to pray with you. We would love to study with you. We would love to befriend you. We would love to welcome you into our family. We would love to help you as we seek to show you the rest that God wishes to provide for us. The peace that surpasses understanding. Or you might wish to put your Savior on in baptism, to have your sins washed away, to arise a new creature, someone who actually is going to look forward to the rest that God is offering us. But whatever need you have, would you please come down as we stand and as we sing.